Welcome to another episode of Dugout Talk. Today is Monday, March 8th, 2021, and it's the start of a new day and it's the start of a new time for us. Uh, we don't have a team today. We've finished all the teams. We've talked about everything that could be talked about. And then, sometime the week of opening day, we'll go back through and give our final thoughts on the teams. But in the meantime, we've got plenty of great options for you guys to watch. Today, we have a special episode of Dugout Talk. This one is called The Men in Blue. As I mentioned, today is March 8th. It's a Monday. And we'll just go ahead and jump into episode 36 here with a little baseball history. So today in 2006, which was already 15 years ago, in the World Baseball Classic, the inaugural baseball classic, Team Canada, which was made up of mostly minor leaguers. I checked their roster. Their best players may have been Eric Bedard, Justin Morneau, and Jason Bay. Um, they stunned the baseball world by beating the heavily favored Team USA in the first round of the World Baseball Classic 8-6, thanks to Adam Stern's inside the park homer, 4 RBIs, and a pair of sensational catches. And Southpaw Adam Lowen, who kept the American All-Stars scoreless for 3 2/3. The Canadians post their most significant victory in baseball history. If you look at USA's roster, so absolutely jam-packed with America's finest ball players, including in current Hall of Famers Derek Jeter, Ken Griffey Jr., and Chipper Jones. Potential Hall of Famers based on your opinions, and Alex Rodriguez and Roger Clemens, plus some of the greatest players from the 2000s and 2010s, guys like Mark Teixeira, Vernon Wells, Matt Holliday, Johnny Damon, Houston Street, Derek Lee, Chase Utley, Jason Varitek, Dontrell Willis, Joe Nathan, Brian Fuentes, Jake Peavy, and Brad Lidge. Um, my biggest thing is like, yeah, those first, two two or three really American World Baseball Classic teams, while they were loaded, I feel like the star power was just too much, and they really weren't. They really didn't have the same drive to win, as say teams like the Dominican, like Puerto Rico, like Japan. Japan's finished top three every single tournament. I think they won the first two tournaments, and then finished third place the last two. But that just goes to show that, like, I don't know. I always looked at the Team USA rosters, and like I said, while they were loaded, I feel like a lot of the guys were just there to have fun. I don't feel like a lot of the guys were there to try to, put something together, which was something that felt totally different in 2017. Guys like Adam Jones, Nolan Arenado, and Giancarlo Stanton, those guys were there to win a game.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what set them apart.
Well, and even other countries, they just have a ton of star-loaded talent also. Like
Yeah,
the
they did.
Dominican always produces great talent.
Yep.
Japan always has great talent.
Yep.
The USA is not the king of the world in baseball. It's just how it is.
Mm-hmm.
So my day in history happened 55 years ago in 1966. Manager Casey Stengel is elected to the Hall of Fame thanks to the Hall of Fame Special Veterans Committee waiving the eligibility rule of 5 years 5 years being out of baseball in order to be elected to the Hall of Fame. Stengel managed the New York Mets for most of the 1965 season before falling and breaking his hip. And the elderly Stengel's managerial career would end. And given his age, I think he was like 75 at the time, the Hall of Fame elected him into Cooperstown 1 year out of retirement. He would pass away 10 years later, but I thought this was kind of a cool little thing. And it's interesting enough because there was a couple years ago, the Mets, they fired Dave Island as their pitching coach and they brought in this old 82-year-old man. I don't even remember what his name was, but he was like, I don't remember if he was a front office guy or if he was kind of like a pitching strategist for them, but they brought this 82-year-old man to be the interim pitching coach. So the Mets like their older coach
Yeah.
for some reason, but I thought this was kind of a cool little thing.
Yeah, and speaking of guys who suffered hip injuries, Albert Bell, I think it's '03 or something like that when he was with Baltimore. It was going to be my day in history until I found the World Baseball Classic
Mm.
one. They actually found that he had like a degenerative hip injury, and that
Oh.
he was actually listed as like it was like unfit to play baseball. Like he
Ooh.
was listed as disabled, unable to play baseball. So they had to go through a whole long process in order to essentially, retire him.
Ouch.
Yeah. Well, we're on to some umpires today. As previously mentioned, we'll go over some retirements and some hirees. Mike Winters spent 32 seasons in Major League Baseball. He umpired in 4 different World Series and officiated 3,810 games. He said goodbye. And Jeremy Rehak,
Rehack.
um, Rehack, he was actually a call-up umpire from 2018 to 2020. He's only appeared in 281 MLB games. But he is officially a part of the full-time staff moving forward.
Rehack is actually a Central PA guy.
Okay,
I don't know if you knew that.
I did not.
Yeah, I think. Well, so note on Mike Winters. He did not work last season because of COVID. He was one of the 13 or 14 umpires that opted out last season because of COVID-19. He's 62 years old, so it made sense. Age definitely played a factor there in that. But Winters actually he technically had his career cut prematurely because in 2019 he had a back injury that ended his season in August. I found out. So he actually hadn't umpired a game in well over a year and a half, and I guess he decided that it was enough. For someone as decorated as Winters, I guess it didn't really matter to him one way or the other if he could kind of get one final season in. But congratulations on retirement to Mr. Winters. And then just a note on Rayak. He's actually there were two minor league call-ups in 2018 that were on the major league roster. As far as like minor league umpires being able to work major league games go, and both of those guys have now been hired to the major league staff. So those guys were really fast works in progress. Rayak was one of those. The other guy was Jansen Visconti, who's also a Central PA guy. So these two guys, the league has made some pretty decent hires over the years. But Rayak is someone who has really impressed the league over the last couple of seasons, really since he became a call up. So there's a lot of poise for him. There's a lot of high praise in the league office for this guy. So I guess be on the lookout for him. See how he does in the first full season.
Yeah, and so I don't. These aren't the actual. Like these aren't like Davis, Gibson, Drake, and Little are one. Is that one crew?
Yes, this is all.
Segues.
Yeah. So how this
Okay.
chart is set up is the first column on the left is crew chief. The second one is umpire 2, which is or also known as the backup crew chief. Third
Mm-hmm.
column is the third umpire in the crew, and the fourth is the fourth umpire in the crew.
Okay.
And it goes horizontally. So you see like the Jerry Davis, his crew consists of Greg Gibson, Rob Drake, Will Little.
Okay.
Um,
Perfect.
yeah, so this is kind of what the crews look like now. From what I'm hearing, it sounds like the crews are going to be regionalized again to start things off this year. So while this is what the 2021 crews looks like, these guys may not be working together to start
Mm-hmm.
the year. It just really depends on one, where these guys live in the off season,
Mm-hmm.
and two, what the league is going to do. Now, I don't know. It's possible they may keep these crews together and just kind of put them in different regions until the COVID stuff starts to settle down and the protocols start to lighten up a little bit. But this is basically just what the crews look like for 2021. This isn't the most important thing on our slides. There's not really a whole lot more to break down other than we have a new crew chief in Mark Carlson, who took Mike
Mm-hmm.
Winters' place. But I'm going to go into more detail about some of the promotions and things like that.
Awesome.
Yeah, this is what the cruise list is. You can also find this on UEFL, which is Umpires Ejection Fantasy League, or Close Call Sports. They have the same list up. So if you want to actually take an in-depth look at it, feel free to do so.
Yeah, I gave it a look over last night, and I found I knew a little over half of the umpires there, so I was pretty proud of myself for that. Taking a look at some 2021 minor league call-up umpires and how that roster figures to shake down. Sean Barber, Ben May, Tom Woodring, Roberto Ortiz, Ryan Addition, John Libka, Nick Marley, Shane Livensparger, Brennan Miller, Alex Tossi, and John Bacon. They all figured to umpire major league games at some point in time this year, being that they're call-up guys. I'm not sure, how this roster looks. Like I said, you're definitely the umpire expert here. You're far closer to one than I am, so to say. But I'm not. Is this a good roster?
Yeah, this is a pretty good roster actually, and there's potential that there's going to be some other guys that will come in. The league might promote to be call-ups throughout the year. Last season, there were at least 20 additional guys that were working games, and there was a pretty impressive group of guys on that slate as well. And the only reason there were so many was because there were a lot of umpires who opted out last season, so the league needed to fill some of those vacancies. But from what I saw on Close Call Sports, this is what the official minor league call-up roster is at the moment. There's a few other guys I guess I would be on the lookout for that might see some games this year. Edwin Moscaso is one. Jose Navas is another guy. I think Dan Merzel will probably get some games in. I'm just mostly thinking of guys who are in spring training right now. Jeremy Riggs, Adam Beck. If you're watching spring training and you're seeing some guys on or you're seeing some minor league guys there's a chance that they may also be minor league call-ups this year, but I'm not really sure how that's all going to play out. So the pictures here, the top left is Roberto Ortiz, and then the bottom left is Sean Barber. Some of these guys are probably in their last stages of being minor league call-ups, so it's pretty much they need to, if the league does not see them as MLB fit or fit to be a full-time MLB umpire, this may be the last time we see some of these guys. I don't have official sources, but there is a little bit of speculation that Tom Woodring may not actually be on the roster to fill in games this year. He wasn't technically on the spring training roster, I guess, from what I saw, but I put him in here because there's no official word on what his status is. And the thing too with Tom Woodring is the number of games he's worked each year has gone down, which for minor league call-ups, that's not a good sign. If they're not being called to work as many games, the longer they're around, it's the least likely it's going to be that they're going to get hired. Sean Barber, he's worked a ton of games over the last few years. I think he's on the short hiring list. John Libka actually led minor league call-ups last year in games worked. I think it was 54 out of the 60 he was on the field for. So he's another guy who's on the rise. There's not a whole lot more to say about this either. I think it's just these guys are going to get shots throughout the year to work games, and it's just a matter of who the league feels is next best fit. Which, if I had to choose, it's probably Lipka and Barber who are next in line since they've been working the most consistently over the last few seasons. So if you hear those names, just don't get confused by the fact that they're not actually full-time umpires. They're just filling in, and they're going to probably be there. You might even see these guys around on different crews throughout the year. They're not going to probably stick around on the same crews like the full-time hires do. So that's something just to keep in mind as well.
I'm sorry, my dog's barking. It's stupid outside.
I heard that.
Yeah, you might hear her in the background. Taking a look at some promotions and demotions for 2021. As we mentioned earlier, Mark Carlson, a new crew chief. Jeremy Rehax, a new hire. In between those two is CB Buckner, Andy Fletcher, James Hoy, Corey Blazer, DJ Rayburn, Trip Gibson, and Scott Barry, who all move up one in the umpire hierarchy. And some demotions made up of Jim Wolf, Lance Barksdale, Mike Muchlinski.
I think that's how you pronounce it. I've never been able to get a clear pronunciation of that.
Will Little and John Tumpane, they all move back one in the umpiring hierarchy.
And demotions is kind of a harsh word, but it's just more so these guys moved down one spot compared to their spots last year. And just to kind of put my 2 cents in on this, I think the reason for Wolf, Barksdale, Muchlinski, Little, and Tumpane, they're probably going to see time working in spots that are what they were in last year. So Wolf and Barksdale will probably work as backup crew chiefs for majority of the year. Muchlinski, Little, and Tumpane will probably work as the number 3s on crews for the most part. Sometimes the league will they'll kind of set their crews up where if they have some newer guys who may have been in a position last year or the year before, sometimes they might move them down a spot if they know that there's going to be some shakeups within the crews. I actually, before 2020 screwed everything up last year when the crews came out, I saw that crew chief Paul Emmel's crew had Emmel, Brian O'Nora, Bruce Dreckman, and Corey Blazer. Dreckman had worked as a backup crew chief the year before. Blazer was an umpire 3 2 years before, but they had that crew the way it was because Emmel was expected to be out pretty much the whole year. I'm not saying this is the case because I'm not sure what I don't know. I haven't heard anything as far as like guys dealing with injuries and they may not be working this year, but Wolf, Barksdale, Muchlinski, Little, and Tumpane all have great resumes from the last few years. They're very worthy of promotion, but the way I see it, just kind of based on how previous years have gone, they were probably listed on the crews the way they are because they're probably going to get a lot of work in at higher positions to begin with anyway. So it's just a possibility. And then as far as promotions go, CB Buckner and Andy Fletcher are 2 of the veterans who were stuck as the number 3s on crews for a very long time. They're now backup crew chiefs. They both worked the postseason last year, as did pretty much every full-time umpire who worked a major league game last season. And then James Hoy, he's been an up-and-coming umpire over the last couple of seasons. He's gotten a World Series and 2 league championship games on his belt, or 2 league championship series, I should say, on his belt. So he earned a very well-deserved promotion. I think they just kind of take it with a grain of salt. There's nothing. It's not so much, because these guys got promoted or these guys got demoted, they're bad or they're really good. Mm-hmm. No, I think it's just more, don't get me wrong, Buckner and Fletcher did really well last year. So, and being veterans, sometimes the league will give the veterans a little more, they'll kind of give them first dibs on promotions, I guess. Or at least I've noticed that over the last couple of years, whether they're super good or not, but there's a reason all these guys are on the field. They're good at something that they do on the field. Some guys are better at balls and strikes. Some guys are better at the base paths. Everyone kind of has their strength. So these guys got promoted. You may be thinking, oh, this guy didn't deserve a promotion. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they did. In their own right, they did this in some way. The league doesn't just promote guys and demote guys for no reason. They watch these guys. Believe me, they do.
Yeah, and I'm sure it has something to do with necessity. Because you have to have I'm sure you have to have a certain amount of guys to fit a certain amount of spots, and as you lose umpires, as you hire new umpires, I think it's all usually just to make sure you have a well-rounded list of guys.
Yeah.
Looking at some milestones that we have some umpires coming up on. The most notable is obviously Jerry West, pictured there in all of his glory in the upper left-hand corner. He's only 31 games away from the all-time umpiring record. Who owns that record as of right now?
Bill Clem.
Bill Clem.
Yeah, he also owns the record for the most World Series worked with 18, I believe. But that was back when when the league didn't care about if an umpire worked the World Series every year. They
Mm-hmm.
care more about that now. I think you meant Joe West too. I think you said Jerry.
Did I say Jerry
I,
West?
I think you did,
That's
but it's okay.
basketball.
We all
Yep.
know.
Yeah. I think I've done that before as well in our group chat. But yeah, Joe West, he's 31 games away from the all-time umpiring record. Some other notable names. I won't list everything here. It's a fairly long list. But some notables. Jerry Davis is only 43 games away from his 5,000th. We have one, two, three, four, five different umpires. Just a handful of games away from their 1,000th. And then a whole bunch of guys in between, whether it be 225, 3, 3,500. So it's interesting to see that we have this many umpires who have been here this often. How long does it take to get 1,000 career games umpired?
Well, the thing is now because of instant replay, there's like a rotation where every 4 weeks or so a crew will go to New York to go work replay, or
Oh,
or
okay.
they'll go on vacation. Because
Hmm.
since replay got put in, the crews there were only 17 MLB crews officially before replay. Now there's 19 because they have two crews working New York every week. Before, the average amount of games worked in a regular season for umpires was about 130. Now it's about
Hmm.
115. So it takes
Okay.
a little bit. I'd say it probably, if an umpire's healthy, it could take them like 9 to 10 years to get to 1,000.
Hmm.
Joe West has been working for 40 years and he's got
Yeah.
that many games on his belt, but the amount of games worked each year, it's just changed over time.
Okay.
Um, so on this list, there were the three guys at the bottom. I put them on here because mathematically, it's still possible they could reach these milestones. But
Hmm.
since 115 games is about the average, it's very
Yeah.
unlikely that Adam Hammery, Paul Emmel, and Mark Ripperger are going to reach their milestones this year. But they should get really close, or they should get within reach of it next year. That they'll probably get there. And I think I was actually really surprised to see these milestones. I didn't realize there were so many guys that were
Yeah.
close to some really marquee games, like Tom Hallion and Jerry Lane. They've been in the league forever, it feels like, and they're knocking on the door to 3,500.
Yeah.
James Hoy, he's knocking on the door to 2,000, which that's a pretty big deal. You don't really hear a lot about these. I know Joe
No.
West, when
Yeah.
he reached 5,000, that was a really big deal. When Jerry Davis gets his 5,000th overall, by the way, it won't be regular season because that
Hmm.
includes postseason games that he's worked as well. When Jerry Davis gets there, that's going to be a big deal. It sounds like he wants to do that game in St. Louis. Um,
Okay.
so I guess that's something to be on the lookout for. Which if everything goes according to plan, he'll probably get there mid-May, late May, kind of around Memorial Day, I'd say, is when that will probably take place. Joe West should reach the record by late April, early May. It's just going to depend on when his crew is off or isn't on the field for the designated week.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, there's kind of a lot to look at, and you're probably not going to hear any of this overall. You might hear about Weston Davis. Actually, you'll definitely hear about Weston Davis because those are
Hmm.
really big milestones. But
Yeah.
the rest of these, you're probably not going to hear about them from anybody because nobody really pays attention to it. Not saying it's a bad thing, but these guys are human too, and they're just as big a part of a game. Why not? Why not give these guys
Hmm.
a little recognition?
Yep.
Tom Hallion should get to 3,500. He's pictured on the bottom there. He should get to 3,500 games the first week of the year if his crew's working. So, um, it is a big deal for these guys. They may not say it's a big deal, but it is a huge milestone to be able to say that you worked 3,000 plus games of Major League Baseball and some change, depending on how many postseasons you probably got in there too.
Yeah. I will have to admit, it is very scary thinking that essentially once a month or once every other month, Jerry West is sitting in New York and he is responsible for working technology and telling people all around the country whether a call is right or wrong.
I
Um,
don't think it's that scary.
no, I'm joking. It's fun. It's easy to pick it. It's easy to pick it, old Joe. Um, Looking at some umpire assignments and how those kind of break down. So Typically, the crew chief will work the home plate. He'll work balls and strikes for the first game aside of the season. And then it'll rotate between home plate, third base, second base, and first base. In postseason, we up our roster to 6 umpires each. Those rotations will be home plate, right field, left field, third base, second base, first base. There is no home field. They will always be on the road. What does that specifically mean? I saw that. I
So
didn't know.
that pretty much means when umpires travel,
Hmm.
umpires live in different places across the country and even around the
Sure.
world. There's a couple guys that don't live in the U.S. They pretty much stay in hotels all the time, unless if they unless if they're at a ballpark where they're close enough to home that they can make the trip home, stay in their own bed kind of thing. So these
Yeah.
guys, when I say no home field, these are guys who are on the road 6 months out of the year, not with their families. They stay in hotels. They get like a specific amount of allowance to kind of help them with food costs and travel costs if they need to do so. Um, yeah, these guys just they don't have a home during the season.
Yeah.
They're not at luxury like baseball teams are, where they get to play half their season at home and they get to sleep in their own beds. So that's more so what I meant by that. It was just a
Okay.
little kind of note there, because I don't think people realize that this is a thing, that the umpires, they're
Hmm.
working 115 games out of the year where they may not even be or they may not even be close to home. There are a handful of guys that don't live anywhere near a major league ballpark. So when the weeks they go home, that's really the only time they go home during the season, unless if
Hmm.
they want to get like one day in, which I've heard of that happening before too, where sometimes guys might just make a 1 day trip home just to be home, kind of thing.
Hmm. Yeah, and I feel like people, it's very easy to forget that these are still people.
Hmm.
They do still have families. A lot of people look at them as just umpires, and then uh, you know you look at them after the baseball game is over. And they are still people. So I
Yeah.
think that definitely can
And the journey isn't easy either. Minor There
yeah,
are horror stories. If you think minor league ball players have it bad, minor league
yeah,
umpires have it a lot worse.
yeah,
And major league umpires, when they get to the major league level and actually get locked up as like a major league umpire, it's so much easier for them, but it has its hardships also.
yeah. All right. So when it comes to the postseason, we have 6-man crews, and some of you might be asking why have 2 extra guys? For the postseason when you typically have four works for 162 games of the year. So why up it to 6 just for the postseason? Well, playoff games have had 6 umpires on the field, tradition since 1947. You get a broader rotation to home plate. You get multiple different guys. So realistically, you should only see one
Hmm.
umpire per game behind home plate. There's meaning there. They are very meaningful games in the postseason. It's a very do or die. So you get more eyes on the field. I know that sometimes in baseball past, there's been, you know, line drives down the line that maybe or maybe not touched the chalk, and it's up to that umpire to make that call fair or foul. So having more eyes on the field is always an advantage. Um, and it's a way to get umpires marquee assignments as well. To get the best umpires on the biggest stage to display their attributes and their
Hmm.
ability to umpire. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'd be down for 6-man umpiring crews in the regular season too. I don't see why not.
Um, Well, I think this is kind of what my thought was with that. Regular season series only consists of 3 to 4 games, sometimes
Hmm.
two. And a 4-man crew, an umpire
Yeah.
should only see like one plate assignment each series. And the same thing actually goes now for postseason. I guess technically it's a 7-man crew that they have for. I guess with the league championship series and the World Series now they do 7 men because at least before 2020, they would rotate guys out of replay. So whoever had game one plate in the league championship series and the World Series, they'd work game 2 and then they'd go to replay for the remainder of the series. And meanwhile, the replay umpire would go work left field for game 3, and then they'd have game 7 plate if necessary. So it's technically a 7-man crew now. But last year they did it a little differently because of obviously how COVID worked out. They actually had 7 guys plus a few others ready. They had a few other guys who were assigned in case they needed them. Thankfully, that wasn't the case. Everyone who signed postseason games last year worked. They didn't need to have like fill-ins or replacement umpires or anything like that. But last year, what they did for the league championship series and the World Series was they had 7 guys there, and what they would do was whoever had the plate the next day would get the night off. So if they worked the plate for game 2, they would not be on the field for game 1, and they would just start it at game 2. I actually really like that rotation personally. I kind of hope they stick with it, but I'm not really sure what the league has in mind with that. I thought it worked really well. It gets all 7 guys consistent amount of playing time. Wow. Amount of time to work on the field. Because I think when you have like one guy who is in his first World Series, for example, and he only gets to work 2 games on the field versus you get a guy who's been there before and he gets more games. Not that it's unfair, but I think it's like, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Why would you rotate someone into replay like that? So the way they did it last year, I thought actually worked really well. I kind of hope they stick to that, but that's just my personal opinion. But this is why they do it. And having 6 umpires on the field, it allows guys who may not be as entitled to get postseason assignments every year. That gives them a chance to at least maybe get one of the outfield lines or maybe an early plate assignment. It's just kind of a fair way to give all their guys a chance to be able to work, because they only did 4-man crews. We'd probably see the same guys every year. It just wouldn't be fair at that point.
They have to walk a very fine line, especially in the postseason when it comes to getting new guys work so you have umpires for the future, and getting your best guys there as well to make sure that the game is umpired correctly. Now, looking at this chart, we'll have a few pages of this. Why don't you give us a quick rundown of each of the columns on this chart?
Yeah, so I was crunching numbers pretty much for the last week and was trying to figure out, do umpire ejections necessarily make an umpire good or bad? Now this tables, there's going to be 5 tables here that will show. So if you can actually like see this, it'd probably be for your own good to actually like watch this part. Just some notes on this. First of all, I split the pages up. I split the charts up based on the umpires ranking. So this chart, for example, is all the crew chiefs for 2021. The next page will be all the backup crew chiefs. The next one is the guys who are listed as the 3s on their crews. The next one is the 4s. And then after that, I did retired or deceased umpires who have worked games since 2015, because I noticed a very good amount of guys have worked at least 500 games. And that was kind of my cutoff, was if they've worked at least 500 games, I put them in here. I did not put minor league call-ups in here, by the way, because I could not get accurate information on those guys. So that's the only reason I left them out. Most of these numbers, though, did come from Retro Sheet. All these stats also start in the year 2010. This is not career numbers. So the game logs you see here, as well as postseason games, these are from 2010 to now. And I felt it was appropriate to just start at the beginning of the 2010 decade instead of 2014. I was asked why I didn't start at 2014 because that was when replay started. It was because if I started at 2010, it's at least recent enough. It still adds to the study. And then there's also this one ejection rate here. There's 2 numbers you might see. The first number is ejection rate since 2010. The second number is career ejection rate. So when I was doing this, I wanted to figure out, one, what is the most popular quote unquote kind of ejection, and second, how popular is that kind of ejection for an umpire? Just to do some quick highlights on this. Kerwin Danley among crew chiefs has the lowest career ejection rate. He has a .97 ejection rate since 2010, which means he doesn't even average an ejection a year. His career ejection rate is 1.73, and that is the second lowest among crew chiefs for career. Jim Reynolds actually has the lowest one. And then looking at the ball strikes, the thing with Kerwin Danley, and this was actually what I wanted to look at, he may only have 11 ejections, but 82% of those fall under the balls and strikes category. As for most of these umpires, a lot of these guys, crew chiefs obviously have worked a lot more games than some of the other guys. So their ball strikes ejection rates aren't nearly as high as what you're going to see. But most of these guys have about 45 to 50% of their ejections fall under the balls and strikes. And then I added replay, fights, and calls on the base paths. And then the other category is for stuff like box, interference, kind of obscure things that people don't run into on a lot of occasions. But Kerwin Danley has the highest ejection rate for balls and strikes amongst crew chiefs. Field and Colbert has the lowest. He actually hasn't had a ball strike ejection since 2014. And that's not to say that it's not because he's getting argued with. It's just more, I was kind of looking at it, and I think this has a lot to do with tolerance. Like, what are umpires going to tolerate? Granted, some of these guys have higher ejection rates than other guys, but some of them are pretty balanced out for the most part. I think one, for example, is Jerry Lane. He's pretty even across the board except for the base paths, but he doesn't have anything over 30%. And another number, the fights. The fights I included in here because those are considered automatic ejections. Anything that is like related to benches being worn, to benches clearing, retaliation, whatever. That is considered an automatic ejection, but to me, that's something that an umpire has no choice. When it comes to stuff like balls and strikes, replay, base path calls, they can decide for themselves if they want to throw the guy out or not, if they want to throw someone out. Like I said, it's kind of to their discretion. Now, granted, the rules state that if managers or players are arguing any of said things, they are supposed to be ejected. And some umpires take that very literally. Some guys not so much. They'll let some things slide as long as you don't make it personal. But some guys do make that they take it very literally. As far as fights go, though, that's something, if it happens, you gotta take care of business. Brian Gorman has the most ejections as far as fights go, which that actually really surprised me. If it wasn't for fights, his ejection rate would actually be a lot lower. The same thing goes for Larry Vanover. He's at like 34%, 45% of balls and strikes with 34% on fights. And then the rest of it is very low across the board. So this is just a very basic table of kind of like what this looks like. As you can see also on the ejection rate, Joe West has the highest among crew chiefs. And it's actually his ejection rate since 2010 is higher than what it is for 2000 or for his whole career. It's a 4.09 since 2010, 3.59 career, but he's actually pretty balanced across this board as well. Say what you want about Joe West, he's actually very well respected around the league. I know there's a lot of people out there who don't really like the way he goes about his business, but there's a very consistent theme among managers and players that if there's a game on the line, they want him on the field for it because they know he's going to be fair. He's old school. He has the most ejections also. All the umpires since 2010, he has the most ejections. But if you look at the postseason game stats, he has 43 postseason games on his belt. So just because his ejection rate is super high, it doesn't necessarily mean that he's a bad umpire. Sure, he's not a great umpire. There are guys I think that are better than him now, but he's still a good umpire. He does his job fair. He knows the rules. He's very knowledgeable about the game. He's someone that, like I said, players and managers respect him, even though he's a little more old school and kind of, I guess you can say, outdated for what today's game is. But he still has a really good resume, even though he may be quicker to hook guys out and not really put up with people's crap. He still is very well he does his job well enough to earn marquee assignments. And that goes for a lot of these crew chiefs. Ted Barrett, he leads the way among crew chiefs with postseason games worked. He's worked 81, and he's only missed the postseason one time since he's been eligible. Umpires are not eligible for postseason games their first full year as a full-time hire. I don't know why the league does that, but that's just the way they do it. Ted Barrett, he became eligible in 2000 to start working postseason games, and he's only missed the postseason one time his whole career since he became eligible. And he's worked 81 games since 2010. He has 3 World Series on his belt as well. So this is just kind of what the table states, and I'm not going to go into the most detail, but I did highlight. I highlighted the things that I mostly wanted to talk about. And just to repeat, Joe West has the highest ejection rate among all crew chiefs. Kerwin Danley has the lowest, but Kerwin Danley also has the highest among balls and strikes. So he may tolerate a lot, but that's like the one I took it as that's the one area that if you argue with him, you better be careful. Everyone else is pretty well balanced out, I think. Yeah, I mean, there's some that are kind of skewed. There are some that are kind of skewed, but again, I would recommend if you actually watch this part, watch it and just kind of look at the numbers yourself, because if I go into explain detail and all this, we're going to be here for like 3 hours. Yeah. So that's what that looks like. And the note about what the numbers mean, that just goes for everything here. So as far as for the backup crew chiefs go, the numbers are a little more even, I guess you can say. Laz Diaz, he has the most games on his belt as far as postseason games to go. Chris Guccione has the most, and Guccione, like Ted Barrett, also hasn't missed the postseason since he became eligible in 2011 to work. So he's actually 2010. He's worked the postseason every year since 2010. As far as ejections go, Bill Welke has the most ejections. Ed Hickox has the least. Hickox also has the lowest ejection rate, 0.71 to 1.36. Hickox just doesn't throw guys out of games. He just doesn't. When he does, it's because of balls and strikes, but for the most part, he just doesn't throw people out. And there's a running joke that goes around for guys who don't like to throw people out, who don't throw people out of games, is because they don't like to do the paperwork involved. Which apparently the umpires have to send an email to the league office with a report of like what happened and why they threw them out.
I'd like to see that.
Yeah, I'd like to see it too, actually. I thought that was kind of funny. Marty Foster, though, he has the highest ejection rate among backup crew chiefs, 3.44 to 4.05 career. So while that number has slightly dipped, it's still pretty high. He's not afraid to throw people out. And I think for Foster, it's pretty well balanced out as well as to what his ejections look like. A lot of his do involve balls and strikes. And when you look at his postseason games worked, he's only got 6 since 2010. So there could be a line there of he may not be the strongest behind the plate. So that's always something to kind of look at. But again, that doesn't always mean everything. Just because a guy doesn't work the postseason, it doesn't necessarily mean they're a terrible umpire. They may not be a strong umpire, but they're not bad at their job because there's a reason they're on the field. And then as far as the balls and strikes go, Phil Cuzzy has the highest ejection rate at 88%. Brian O'Norris is the lowest at 33%. And if you look at Ona's numbers, his are actually pretty level across the board. He has the most among replay decisions or reversal calls. I included reversal calls on replay just because replay didn't come in until 2014. So when I say replay on this chart, I also mean any calls that were reversed, whether there was no replay or not, based on how Retro Sheet described it. I had no way of really being able to tell if it was a replay decision or not. So these also involve replays and reversal calls. He has the highest among those, and there are several backup crew chiefs that don't have any ejections in that category, so I didn't highlight any green. As far as fights go, Marvin Hudson has the most. 35% of his ejections have involved fights. And Hudson's ejection rate, I wanted to take a quick note on this. His has actually His is at 1.99 right now, which is about league average. Like 2 is about the league average for
Okay.
umpires. But Marvin Hudson has not had an ejection since 2017. He has the longest active streak for that. And I thought that was worth noting because he was someone who in 2010 and 2011 would throw guys out of games a lot, but then it really cooled off for him. And he just doesn't throw people out, whether he's, I guess it's because he just hasn't had reason to do it. But he's definitely slowed down on the ejections. If it wasn't for the fights, I think his ejection rates would really be down because he had 2 years where he was pretty high on that total. And then Ed Hickox and Chris Guccione, they've never had to throw guys out, but they've only been backup crew chiefs for 2 years now. And typically, whenever there's a fight involved, it's usually the crew chief who will take care of that. Not always the case, but for the most part, the crew chief will take care of any ejections that involve fights. As for calls on the base paths, Ed Hickox has the highest ejection rate at 25%, but again, he only has 8 ejections since 2010, so take that with a grain of salt. And then Tony Rendazzo and Angel Hernandez actually do not have any ejections related to base path calls that weren't replay reviewed. I did, if it was listed as a replay decision, I did not list it as a base call. But I thought that was interesting too, that Angel does not have any that go as far as bases go. But in the other category, Angel Hernandez does have the most at 30%. And I looked at what that in totaled, and that's box. Angel actually has the most ejections involving box. I believe since 2010, he has like 11 of them. So that's like a good chunk of what his ejections involve. If it's not balls and strikes, it has to do with balk calls. So that, I thought that was actually kind of interesting. And I know Angel Hernandez is an umpire that is infamously well known, whether he wants to be or not. And I know he's not very well liked around the league, but I thought that was kind of an interesting stat to look at as well. And then in the other category, Doug Eddings and Paul Nauert, they had 0% on those. This next sheet, this has to do with the threes, the 3 ranks in on the Crews. Todd Tichenor has the most games since 2010 with 1,278. Now, a lot of these guys, the what we're starting to get into now, most of these guys have been working, like 2010 was their first years before they were kind of like call-up umpires. So we're starting to get into the category now of we're starting to get career numbers from these guys. Not all of them, obviously, but a good chunk of them. This is kind of how it goes. Jim Wolf leads all umpire threes in postseason games worked with 53. He also has the lowest ejection rate with 8. He also has 8 ejections since 2010. Lance Barksdale does have a lower ejection rate technically, but overall Wolf's is the lower one, 0.77 to 1.07. Barksdale is 0.71 to 1.67, and that's because Barksdale had a lot of ejections early on in his career, but since 2010 he only has 9. Dan Bellino has the most ejections with 47, and his ejection rate is also the highest at 3.76 to 3.67. When you look at the balls and strikes ratio, Lance Barrett leads the way in this, 96%. So 23 of his 24 ejections have come because of balls and strikes. That's not necessarily great. And I say that because I've actually seen some of the videos regarding Lance Barrett's ejections, and Barrett he was not very good behind the plate for a long time. So that makes sense why his would get argued a little more consistently. Adrian Johnson has the lowest ejection rate as far as balls and strikes go with 27. He's one of 2 umpires who are umpire threes that have below 40% of their ejections as balls and strikes. Jim Wolf is the other guy at 38. And then for replay, these guys don't necessarily get a lot of opportunity because they're not crew chiefs. Usually crew chiefs will take care of replay or reversal ejections, but Manny Gonzalez actually leads that department with 10% of his ejections coming because of replay. And he has a very low ejection rate as well. So he's not a guy that gets argued with a lot. As far as fights go, Jordan Baker, 44% of his ejections actually matches his balls and strikes ratio as well. 44% of his ejections have come because of fights. And then Barrett, Manny Gonzalez, and Brian Knight, they don't have any as far as like fightings or warnings go. As far as base path calls go, Corey Blazer has the most 21 or has the highest one at 21%. There are several guys there who don't have any. And then for calls that fall in the other category, Jim Wolf has the most with 24% there. So among the U3s, these guys are kind of more balanced out, but a lot of their ejections come because of balls and strikes. And that's because that's something that, because of other calls here, minus base path calls, crew chiefs usually will take care of those. That's something you're going to see more with guys who have acted as crew chiefs to some degree. Not always, though. Like I said, sometimes these guys will take it into their own discretion. And then the last page, or the second to last page, I guess. These are the U4s on the crews. Now, I said that kind of like my qualifying thing was 500 games these guys had to work in order to be considered as like realistically, what's the word? I guess to fall into like qualifying categories of who has the lower rates, who does or higher rates. So most of these guys, minus Mike Machlinski and Mike Easterbrook, they've worked less than 1,000 games. Some of these guys have worked less than 500 games. Mike Easterbrook has the most games on his belt with 1,216. Jeremy Riak has the fewest with 281. As far as postseason games go, Will Little leads the way actually with 20 postseason games. He also has the second most ejections since 2010 with 33. Mike Easterbrook leads the way with 34. Little does have the highest ejection rate, though, and of all MLB umpires, Little has the highest with 4.13. His ejections have gone down the last couple of years, which is a good sight to see. I think the thing with young umpires is sometimes I think it's easy for young umpires to get trigger happy. And what I mean by trigger happy is they're trying to prove that they can take control of a situation. And I think a lot of times what young umpires will fall into is ejecting someone from a game is how you diffuse a situation, which that's not always the case. And as these guys work more games, they learn that. They start to learn that they don't need to throw everybody out who contests their calls, who starts arguing with them from the dugout, because like I said, there's constant chirping going on all the time in the game. If you're on the field, you're going to hear it. It doesn't matter like who you are. You could be the best umpire out there. You're going to hear chirping on the field because of a call you made. If you've ever played the game of baseball, you know that's a thing. Even when I was in high school, there was constant chirping, just chirping back and forth. It always felt like in every game that I probably was ever part of. But as young umpires, they may have higher ejection rates, but I think it's because they feel like in order to diffuse a situation, they've got to show that they're in charge, which isn't bad. It is kind of a way to say like, hey, I've got control of this. I'm like, don't tell me what to do. It's not always a bad thing, but I think that it is important for those guys to learn, though, that that's not always a last resort. Like you can keep a guy in a game. Like you can chirp, you can argue, as long as you're not like going overboard with it, or you're not making it personal where you start attacking the guy who's calling the game, then it's fine. And actually, just to kind of speak on that note, Jansen Visconti has the fewest amount of ejections among all the U4s. He only has 292 games on him, but he hasn't had an ejection since 2018. And he got hired to the Major League staff 2 years after becoming a call-up. So this is a guy, I think, who actually has he knows how to control a game and also keep guys in the game. He doesn't resort to throwing people out, which that's a good thing to see with young umpires. Even with the U3s, if you looked at the chart, that was, there was a lot of young umpires there who aren't really guys who throw people out, like Corey Blazer, for example. So they're there. I think it's just an easy trap for some umpires to fall into when they're young, is they feel like ejecting is the way to go, which that's not always the case. Sometimes it's warranted, but that's not always the case. As far as ejection rates go, I said Little had the highest. Gabe Morales has the lowest. You could argue Ryan Blakeney actually has the lowest, but Morales does have more games. That's why I highlighted that. He averages 1.01 ejections a game, or in a 162 game season, and all of his ejections have come because of balls and strikes. Ryan Blakeney, though, he only has 4 ejections across 650 games. So he's a guy who also doesn't revert to throwing people out. And Blakeney was one of the new hires in 2020. So, I mean, it's a good sight to see when you have young umpires that don't feel like they have to go that route.
Mm-hmm.
But as you can see, the balls and strikes, it's a very popular thing among these guys. That's really what most of their ejections come down to. Mark Ripperger and Mike Easterbrook are the only guys who have ejections as far as reversals or replay go. Among this group, as far as fights go, Carlos Torres leads that group, and that's because he was the home plate umpire the day the Tigers and Yankees brawled out 3 times that one year. I don't remember what year that was, but he was the umpire, and that's why
2017.
yeah, that
2016.
sounds about right.
Yeah.
He was the plate umpire, so he was the one who pretty much took charge of that.
I see.
As far as base paths go, Mike Muchlinski leads that with 16% of his ejections, and then Stu Shearwater has 27% of his ejections falling under the other category. Again, I think, and another note on Little, he may have the highest ejection rate, but he actually has the most postseason games as far as these guys go. So I don't think just because a guy might have a high amount of ejections, I don't think that means they're a bad umpire by any means.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I think sometimes the league may prefer that guys will not be afraid to pull the trigger. It kind of feels that way sometimes, but when you look at guys like Jim Wolf and Lance Barksdale and Ted Barrett, who are consistently in the postseason too, it shows that the league doesn't always value that at the same time.
Yeah, and I think what's important to remember here is that, like, at the end of the day, there are situations. I know there probably aren't many, but I know that there are in fact situations where to get your dugout going, maybe get your team going. Maybe a coach will purposely get himself tossed out of a game, arguing over something stupid, just to prove to his guys that he's neck deep in making sure that he does everything he can for them. So
Yeah,
there's a lot of circumstances where some of these numbers may be skewed a little bit.
exactly. This is the last set. These are umpires who have either retired or have passed away. I only included guys that have worked since 2015 because from 2010 to 2015 and so on, they had at least 500 games on their belt. As you can see, Mike Everett was the one Bob Davidson was actually the one who led the way as far as ejections go with 35, and he did not work any postseason games since 2010. Not saying he's a bad umpire, but I know a lot of people remember Bob. He was he didn't put up with a lot of nonsense. That's just the way he was. His ejection rate was the highest, also 3.98 to 4.42, and it was the highest by a wide margin because everybody else was below 2.5, at least pre-2000 or post-2010. Everyone on here was below 2.5. But again, I think this is another popular thing here is balls and strikes. That was a really high thing for most of these guys. Fights were another one, though. I know it was Dana DeMuth and Jeff Kellogg. They had the lowest balls and strikes percentage ejections, but they had the highest as far as fights go, as well as Tim Welke. The 3 guys on here with the lowest ejection rates as far as balls and strikes go, most of theirs were because of fighting. So if it wasn't for the fights, their ejection rates would be a lot lower. But I just included this group in more just to kind of help out with the study, since these guys actually did work a fair amount of games. I felt it was only fair to include these guys. But this was a very decorated group of umpires as well. These were some of the best of the best in the game for their time. Some of these guys, it was because of injuries. Some of these guys, because it was just time to hang them up. Unfortunately, there's one on here that was because of death. But other than that, I just wanted to include this group in here as well. But that's pretty much what that study says. And then I've kind of talked about it throughout as far as highest ejection rates go. Will Little obviously leads the pack with 4.13. Joe West, Carlos Torres, Dan Bellino, Vic Carapazza, Sam Holbrook, Marty Foster, Hunter Wendelstedt, Bill Welke, and Mark Ripperger. But these guys, a majority of these guys have a very good postseason resume on their belts. Minus Foster and Ripperger, Torres hasn't been around long enough to really prove it, but he did work a postseason play last season, so that's a good sign for him. But for the most part, most of these guys are consistent postseason or consistently work postseason games. So they may have high ejection rates, but they're not. I don't think they're terrible umpires. They just don't put up with a lot. That's kind of what I was looking at as far as this goes. Like they're still very highly thought of around the league, but they don't tolerate a lot of nonsense from people.
Mm-hmm.
It's just how it is. Like I said, every umpire is different as far as toleration goes. And then with lowest ejection rates, Ryan Blakeney does lead the pack. Ed Hickox and Lance Barksdale are tied for second. Jim Wolf, Paul Nart, Manny Gonzalez, Kerwin Danley, Ted Barrett, Gabe Morales, and Jim Reynolds. They are the guys who eject the least amount. These are also a good chunk of these guys are consistently in the postseason as well, like the likes of Wolf and Danley.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not Danley, but Barrett, Reynolds, and even Manny Gonzalez over the last few years has found himself in postseason roles. Paul Nauert's worked the replay center quite a bit for the postseason. So, these guys are just as highly touted as well. It just goes to show ejection. I think I've found through this study that ejection rate does not mean a lot. You're going to have guys who throw a lot of people out in a course of a season. You're going to have guys who don't throw anybody out unless they absolutely have to. Everybody just tolerates something a little different. There's nothing, there's no right or wrong way to necessarily do it. Just kind of how do they feel they need to handle business.
Yeah, I agree. And, as I mentioned earlier, and in my final thoughts, I'll get to those. You look at the average ejection total for umpires each season, it's right around 2. So you think about it over the course of, 100, 130 games umpired a season, they only throw out 2 guys a year. I think that because we see so many players, over the course of a year get thrown out, that most people probably assume that number is higher.
Mm-hmm.
We see so many different guys behind the plate every day that it's almost easy to look at umpires as just one group, and so it's kind of easy to strew those numbers. Balls and strikes are typically the highest ejection total for an umpire, and and it's definitely easy to see why, because it's not something you can go to that umpire and be like, hey, like, this was a strike. You're technically not allowed to do that, and there's
Right.
as of right now no system to try to fight that, I guess to say. Some umpires tolerate more than others. Some guys you can go to great lengths to try to really tick off, but a lot of those guys can take quite a bit of verbal beating. I've heard what some managers have said. I've heard who was it with the Mets when Noah Syndergaard. I think Noah.
Oh, Terry Collins.
Yeah, Terry Collins. Yeah, there's a great. I know that it's really, it's not a good thing, but I would love to hear managers and umpires mic'd up during their conversations more often.
I mean, we got it last year because there were no fans in the stands. You can look up any John Boy video. You're gonna hear the audio.
Yep. And so because not every single umpire and manager are mic'd up, we don't typically know what is exchanged during these arguments. You don't know. People say a lot of things when they're heated like that, when they're upset, when they're trying to get a point across. They'll say just about anything. So, we don't know if threats are being used. We don't know if family and friends are being made fun of. There's a long list of no-nos that I'm sure a lot of managers and a lot of field coaches in general probably use out there. Obviously, ejections do not determine how good an umpire is at their job. If you kick more guys out. You're not better than someone who doesn't kick anyone out. And, you're not better than someone who kicks, 4 guys out a year if you kick out, half of one. So I think the last thing here, I added this one myself. Umpires are, they have a very hard job. Calling balls and strikes. You think it's hard to hit a ball, try calling a ball. It's probably almost as hard. And like everyone, there are still people. They are still humans. They're not perfect. You know, they're trying to be perfect, but as that's not going to happen, the day we see a perfect umpire will be the day I believe someone can hit 1,000 over the course of a season,
Yeah.
or go 33-0 with no earned runs. So, yeah, those are my final thoughts, or our final thoughts in general.
I guess one other thing, just note
Yeah.
too, these guys consistently score 97% on plate scores,
Yep.
which
Accuracy.
if that's considered bad, I mean, that's still an A in anywhere you go. It doesn't matter what school you go to. You get 97%, you get an A. So just that's something to keep in mind, that, as hard as it is, these guys still can consistently get 97% of their calls correct on a given day.
Now, I will admit, there was a day, I think this was 2019, the Yankees were in Toronto, and Angel Hernandez was behind the plate, and Brett Gardner took a ball right down the middle, and Angel Hernandez called it the Yankees were pitching, and someone threw a strike right down the middle, and Angel Hernandez called it a ball.
It happens.
Yeah, I've never seen something quite that bad. But even Angel Hernandez fits. He's what, like 98% or something like that.
Yeah, he's right in the middle. He's not terrible. He's not great. He's good. He's still, to say what you want about him, he's not obscure one way or the other. I think it's just, I guess maybe more on his end, it's kind of like a personality thing, possibly. I guess, I don't know, but even Angel Hernandez, as much as people like to take a dump on him, he's still a good umpire.
I like to imagine that he's really good at calling balls and strikes, but yeah, I feel like he has more of those, wow, I can't believe he missed those calls than anyone else.
I guess that's fair. He has more. When he misses, it's pretty
even just the other day in spring training, people said that he was in mid-season form, poking a little fun at him. But as always, we've reached the end of another episode, which means I get to tell you guys that you can find us on social media. You can find us on Instagram at Real Dugout Talk. You can find us on TikTok now at Dugout Talk. You can find us on Twitter at Dugout Talk 1. You can always find us here on YouTube at Dugout Talk, and you can also find us on Facebook at Real Dugout Talk. Appreciate you guys watching today. Today was the first of a new era in Dugout Talk podcasting. Our first non-breakdown video since late January, mid-January.
Late January, I think.
And really the deepest that we've done a dive into one set topic. So I liked it. I look forward to doing more of this. Definitely looking forward to the start of regular season. I'm really excited to do like the daily recap, just to get into some regular season baseball, talk about, the big storylines, and talk about maybe the heroes or the players of the games and stuff like that. I'm excited.
Yeah, we got some fun content ahead. Wednesday we're going to do some kind of special. We're going to actually break down the 2011 Cardinals World Series team and figure out how in the world did they do that. We're going to do a few of those kind of over time as well. We're just going to do some like one hit wonder kind of breakdown. So Wednesday should be a fun episode.
I'll give you a hint. Alan Craig, Albert Pujols, some pitching. That's it. Oh, man. David Freese once they got to the thing, but Albert Pujols, Will Craig, Alan Craig, sorry, and pitching.
Yeah. But until then, thank you guys for sticking with us today. I know it was a little bit of a longer episode, but we hope you enjoyed it. If you are interested in knowing a little more about umpires and just kind of following them, Close Call Sports is a great place to go. They have they have a lot of information. They do a lot of analysis as far as just like rules go. So if you're interested in learning more about the rules of the game, go check their site out. They do a great job out there. They have a great discussion forum. You might even run into some former umpires over there. Just saying, you might. But until then, we'll be back on Wednesday with our one hit wonder breakdown of the St. Louis Cardinals of 2011, and we will see you guys Wednesday.
See you guys.